and I'm a musician. I do think I see life mainly through the lens of music, basically. But also many other things. I mean, I love music. I'm passionate about it. It's what I've done for the most of my life. But I love life. I love art in general. I love people. I love nature. I'm also entrepreneurial, I believe. So I love to combine everything together. But obviously, I think at the center will be music. I see myself as a musician, a scholar in the making. Yeah. Of course, parts of it is political and unnecessary, but of course, politics can sometimes be unnecessary, but for whatever reason. I don't really think there should, in an ideal world, there shouldn't be any distinction between those, especially in musicology and ethnomusicology. I think that the distinction between both is superficial and not real. Now, I wrote something about it in one of my essays, I think in my honors year, and I was basically problematizing that, and I was saying that there really is no way you can study music without the culture in which the music itself evolved, in which it was inspired, that produced the culture that produced the music. They're linked, basically, and you can't just sieve out the music and leave the culture, and which is what has happened with musicology or classical music. They would look at just the composer because they, in my own opinion, controversial as it might be, they have been misled by the concept of art for art's sake. I don't believe, as at now, it may change. I once believed in art for art's sake, but I don't believe that there is such a thing as art for art's sake. I think that it's always linked to our environment, to who we are, and that we cannot take one out without having the other with it. Music is a cultural package. That is, music comes with virtually everything that embodies that culture. You find it in music, be it their history, their just mundane things, just their food, their dance, their, how they relate with the world. So to study music itself is to study people. And that's where, for me, I found ethnomusicology. I mean, after I experimented with it, in my honors, I just felt there was no other way. I mean, what else would I do? So music is a cultural package. It comes from somewhere, so from people who are a product of the society. They're a product of that society. And so the music that comes from them, although inspired, although might be a little, personal, it's linked to that culture, to that society, to the people, to their way of, to their philosophy of life, their way of thinking, and all sorts of things. And I think it is some form of disservice, I don't know to who, to just take out the music and not look at the culture. And that was what has happened in the musicology stroke, classical music. I think that we will have had much more context, and I think that classical music would not struggle to find a wide audience as it currently does if the culture was a strong part of studying the music, because I think it will have evolved with the culture rather than now that it's a kind of a preservative mode, kind of thing. And then with ethnomusicology, for me, if you think of music as a cultural package, something that embodies everything about a people, then it would be appropriate to look at their history, to look at, African studies, to look at anthropology, linguistics, and to look at, in a very holistic way. So I don't see any other way of studying music than through an ethnomusicological lens, because it is holistic. It looks at the music, the people, the culture, their language, and these are the things that music looks at. Music looks at all of that. I may never be able to learn a language, but put it in music, we learn it quickly. That helps a lot, I know there's been people who have, survived in a foreign land because of the language they learn in the music. Just, being able to say one or two words, and it sticks. That's music. Music has many benefits, you learn other skills, you can use it towards other ends, but even music as an end in itself. So I don't think there's any better argument for the study of music than what ethnomusicology presents. In conclusion, I think that we should all be ethnomusicologists. You see, musicology, according to the textbook definition, is supposed to be some form of, systematic study of music, if you like. And I mean, there's no one definition, but the problem is that it has restricted itself mostly to Western European musicians, especially the older ones, up till early, maybe 20th century. And it's been stuck there. Of course, there's been a few, additions, few new composers, but it's stuck mostly in the Western canon of composers, music, repertoire, and all of that. And it can't find its way out of it. And moreover, it is also crossed over to obviously political sides, basically almost, it's like covertly saying that, that is what is worth studying, that, it's those composers, the Western canon that is kind of worth such systematic, rigorous study. Hence, that prefix, ethno, as though musicology and those ones, they are not an ethnic group. So what makes one ethnic? Yeah, it should just be one and different people with specialization studying different things, But also there are people like myself. I don't want to be restricted because I think I have the ability to go in and out. And even if I don't, I would love to develop the ability to move between what you call musicology and ethnomusicology. There's an important argument for that. It's because most of these things have been kind of centered on this duality, this us, them, this type of stuff, whereas we are more linked. We are very linked in terms of all our music, what we do, the interconnectedness of everything that we do. I think the challenge is that some acknowledge it, others don't. They don't acknowledge the interconnectedness of all the things we do. Okay, let me just go straight into it. If you look at early European history, especially the medieval going to the Renaissance period, in most Western music history books, they don't talk much about the medieval or what they call the Middle Ages. Now, the reason was that Europe wasn't that strong or enlightened during that period. The Middle Ages belonged to the Arabs. From the 7th century all the way to late 15th centuries, the Arabs were very strong. They conquered, they exerted so much power and influence in every area: architecture, mathematics, science, but especially in music. Most European instruments, and this has been confirmed by notable musicologists such as Henry Farmer and Kurt Sachs, that most European musical instruments come from Asia or are of Asian origin. I mean, you can go, there's a lot of them, but if we just come to two instruments, which is the violin, comes from the rebab. The rebab is the earliest known bowed string instrument. And the early European predecessors of the violin, the viol, the viola, the gamba, and those early ones that were directly related or were directly adapted from the rebab, they were played like this until later on, they brought it this way. So if you look at that musical instrument, so which is the violin, I mean, if somebody told you that, look, the forebearers or the ancestors of the violin in the musical lineage is not European, you wouldn't believe. You find it hard to believe. And I think in our education, in our music education, that has been the broken link. The Arab and African contributions were cut off. And so we don't see how we are interconnected. And so it makes somebody able to say, oh no, this is pure, this is not, those type of stuff. Whereas if you really look at it, and I'm really taking this argument somewhere closer to home, but let me begin here. So the other instrument is the guitar. And the guitar can trace its ancestry back to, if you go back, we'll talk about the babat, which is of Persian origin. And that instrument was introduced to the Arab. And it transformed into the oud, al-oud, and that the oud is it is the most important instrument in the Arab world When you use the oud, you tune it according to the modes, the makamat. The oud is that instrument that embodies Arab, music making. And if you look at that instrument, it was introduced to Europe during the time when the Arabs conquered parts of Spain, but was renamed Andalusia. And the person who introduced that instrument is a man known as Ziryab. Ziryab means, blackbird. And Ziryab was a black person because Ziryab says blackbird. Black because he was dark-skinned. Bird means, was versatile singer, He came from Iraq and from Baghdad then, all the way. He was banished, by his teacher. And then he went all the way to North Africa and then eventually made his way to Cordoba in Spain. And it was during that time that the oud went all the way to North Africa and to Spain. And Ziryab was very, very, very instrumental to the music of Spain. What will form the foundation of a rich Spanish music tradition. And it is the oud that developed into the guitar. There are a couple of instruments in between. I think about 6 instruments, including the guitar and the oud itself. 6, 7, I think so. The way it gradually transformed, into what we now know as the modern guitar. And we talk about the Spanish guitar, but it has its roots back then. And we could take it in different ways. We look at a composer like Scarlatti. Scarlatti left Italy to Spain. He had to immerse himself in that music environment there. And of course, if you listen to a lot of his compositions, you will hear that scale, that Arabian, scale. And even in the Spanish music style, you will hear it. You will hear it. I mean, I never heard it before, but now that I'm aware of it, now I hear it. When I say, oh, this makes sense. Now, even though there's been such non-Western influence in Western music, in most of the Baroque suites, you have a movement called the saraband. And the saraband is, it originates from North Africa. It's a dance movement that originates, in North Africa. If you look at the process that I'm talking about, which is that movement from, Baghdad, Middle East to North Africa to Europe through Spain, it made sense that it would find its way all the way into Europe. And it has been included in the Baroque suites, the movement, saraband is very prominent. And many of the composers, including, Scarlatti, Bach, most notably, Handel, they use that dance movement. So the question that I want to ask is it because they used, those styles, maybe the instrument that has its origin in Asia, especially those early composers, because they were closer to that heritage, to that, link, much so than, latter composers. But is it because the musical instruments have their origin in Asia? Or is it such a dance movement like the saraband? Does that make their music non-European? Or does it make it European? Or what is it? Now, I'm going to take it home. There are people who feel that because African music is played on European musical instruments, it is less African because of that. Or because it uses Western harmony, borrows from it in a way, it's hybrid, it's no longer African, it's not fully African. I listened to an interview by a friend, who was writing about Fela and was really discussing this issue of ownership and originality, and was talking about how some scholars and people think that Fela's music is not 100% African, that he was using a lot of European musical instruments. He used Western harmonies and, reused it and, in his own way, though nonetheless, it's not, in a lot of fields, ethnomusicology being one of them, there's this obsession with purity, pure Africanness. Let's go into the bush where they have no contact, it's pure, those, it will be difficult, because human beings have been migrating and borrowing since ages. And to be researching interconnectedness and movements through the sea and land really opens you up to what people have been doing, that human beings by nature are curious. They want to see, they want to know, they try, they move, they migrate, they go out, they borrow from other people. So linking it back to Fela, if Fela's music, because he had borrowed or he made use of, Western musical instruments and maybe some harmonies, if because of that it would be less African, then perhaps most of those Western music composers who used instruments that had their origin in Asia and used musical styles and all of that, maybe their music may also be less European. And if that is not, why then would Fela's music be less African? So those are the kind of things that you have to look at. And it goes back to the fact that we need to acknowledge the fact that life in itself is incomplete, that we find purpose, at least we are more whole when we borrow from other people. And we should acknowledge that, at least. And that's what has happened, that some have acknowledged it, some haven't acknowledged it. And so some claim to be pure while others are not. But if in fact we look at it holistically, and that's why it's important, and that's why I said everybody should be ethnomusicologists. Because then if we looked at most of those music compositions within their cultural space, we would know where some of these influences came from. We will not just look at the music as one small component and leave out the society. So I think we should stop obsessing about purity. Is it purely African? I think we are trying to go somewhere that does not exist, that did not exist in the first place.